When we talk about reading, we often focus heavily on decoding, sounding out, blending, and recognising words automatically. And decoding is absolutely essential. Without it, children cannot access text independently. But decoding is not the final destination. It is the doorway to reading. For example, I could show you these lists of words that you are perfectly capable of sounding out using your phonetic knowledge. You can read them fluently and accurately, and yet, if they are unfamiliar or disconnected, they wouldn't hold much meaning for you. That is often what we see when children begin their reading journeys. They can say the words, they may even say them confidently, but meaning has not yet fully formed. Understanding, or comprehension, is what allows children to make sense of what those words actually mean, and that develops over time, alongside decoding, not after it. So when we talk about reading for meaning, we're talking about the process of building understanding, not just accuracy. So what do we actually mean by meaning? Let's break it down into the smaller areas that together build understanding, and look at the skills children gradually develop as they learn to read. Literal understanding, language, accuracy, inference, fluency and expression, and children's responses to texts are all key parts of building meaning in reading. Each of these develops gradually, and each supports the others. When they begin to work together, understanding becomes more secure. Let's look at each area in a little bit more detail. Beginning with literal understanding. This is the foundation of comprehension. It includes being able to understand what has happened in a text, to sequence events, and to retrieve information accurately. When we think about literal understanding, we might gently consider a few things. Is your child able to answer different types of questions based on what they have read, not guessed, but grounded in what is actually there in the text or the pictures? After finishing a story, can they retell what has happened in their own words? Can they recall what happened at the beginning, the middle, and the end, even if that retelling is simple and supported? Can they find specific pieces of information in a book, such as the author's name or something listed in the contents? Do they understand that certain words or features in a book help us to locate information? These are all signs that literal understanding is developing. And it's important to remember this development is gradual. Children move between confidence and uncertainty depending on the text, their language knowledge, and how secure they feel. The next layer is language, and this sits in two places: the language used by the author and the vocabulary the child brings to the text. Both are full of deliberate language choices. Authors repeat words for effect, they use rhythm, alliteration, rhyme, and onomatopoeia to create mood and meaning. They choose precise words to describe emotions, settings, and actions. As children grow as readers, they begin to notice these choices. They might spot repetition in a story, recognise a rhyme, or pause when a word feels powerful or unusual. They may begin to notice that an author has chosen a specific word to describe how a character is feeling, rather than something more ordinary. Alongside this, a child's own vocabulary plays a crucial role in comprehension. If a word is unfamiliar, understanding can quickly become fragile. So we might gently notice whether a child is beginning to explain what new words mean or link them to words they already know. Can they describe a word in their own way? Can they think of a similar word from their own vocabulary? Do they begin to make connections between new language and familiar experiences? Vocabulary development does not happen separately from reading, it grows with it. The richer a child's spoken language becomes, the more secure their reading comprehension will be. And again, this is gradual. Children do not need to define every word they encounter. They need exposure, conversation, and repeated opportunities to hear and use language in meaningful contexts. Another important layer is accuracy, but not in the narrow sense of simply getting every word correct. Accuracy in early reading is closely connected to self-monitoring. It is about whether a child can notice when something doesn't quite make sense, and whether they feel confident enough to pause and adjust. One of the most powerful ways this develops is through modelling. When adults read aloud and occasionally say, "Oh, that didn't quite feel right. Let me try that again." They show children that rereading and correcting are normal parts of reading. It becomes part of the process, not a sign of failure. As children grow more confident, we might notice whether they begin to hear when something doesn't sound right. Do they pause if a sentence feels confusing? Do they sometimes go back and reread independently? Are they willing to attempt a correction without being prompted? Self-correction is not a weakness. In fact, it is often a sign of deepening understanding. A child who notices an error and fixes it is actively monitoring meaning. That shows engagement, not deficiency. Accuracy also depends on the complexity of the text and the child's familiarity with vocabulary and sentence structure. When texts stretch children appropriately, small inaccuracies are parts of learning. What matters is whether the child is supported to reflect rather than rushed or overcorrected. Over time, as decoding becomes more secure and self-monitoring strengthens, accuracy stabilizes. But it grows most effectively in an environment where rereading is normalized and mistakes are treated as information, not criticism. Another important layer in reading for meaning is inference and prediction. These are often seen as more advanced skills, but in reality they begin very early, long before children encounter formal comprehension questions. Inference is the ability to work out something that the author has not stated directly. It involves noticing clues in the text or illustration and combining them with what a child already knows about the world. Prediction is closely related. It is about anticipating what might happen next based on patterns, events, or character behaviour. In the early stages of reading, inference might look simple. A child might say that a character is sad because they are crying, or that something surprising might happen because of a particular illustration. These small observations are the foundations of much deeper understanding later on. As children move through reception into Year 1, we might notice them beginning to explain their thinking in slightly more detail. They may refer to something that happened earlier in the story or link events together. By Year 2, many children begin to articulate how they know something, pointing to a phrase in the text or describing a pattern in the storyline. It is important to remember that inference develops through experience and conversation. Children draw on their vocabulary, their background knowledge, and their understanding of human behaviour. If those foundations are still growing, inference may feel more difficult, and that is entirely natural. Adults can support inference most effectively by modelling thoughtful reading, wondering aloud about why a character acted in a certain way, noticing a detail that hints at emotion, or linking two events together gently demonstrates how readers think beyond the surface of a text. What matters is not whether a child gets the right answer immediately, but whether they are beginning to notice connections and reflect on meaning. Inference grows through shared curiosity, not interrogation. Over time, as children gain more experience with stories and language, prediction and inference become more secure. They begin to see patterns in text, anticipate outcomes, and interpret subtle cues. These skills deepen understanding and allow children to engage with stories in a richer, more thoughtful way. Like all aspects of reading for meaning, inference and prediction strengthen gradually. They are nurtured through exposure to stories, rich language, and calm discussion, not through pressure or rapid questioning. Fluency and expression are often associated with speed, but true fluency is much more than reading quickly. It is about reading with appropriate pace, phrasing, and intonation so that meaning is clear. When fluency is developing well, reading begins to sound more like natural speech. Children pause at punctuation, group words into meaningful phrases, and adjust their tone depending on what is happening in the text. Expression is not performance, it is evidence of understanding. In the early stages of reading, fluency may sound hesitant or word by word. This is completely normal while decoding is still becoming secure. As children grow more confident with word recognition, their attention gradually shifts from sounding out to shaping meaning across a sentence. Adults can support fluency most effectively through modelling. Reading aloud with natural expression, drawing attention gently to punctuation, and occasionally rereading a sentence to show how phrasing changes meaning all help children internalise what fluent reading sounds like. It can also be helpful to notice whether a child's expression matches the text. Do they raise their voice at a question mark? Do they soften their tone when a character is worried? These small shifts often indicate that comprehension is strengthening. Fluency develops through repeated exposure to familiar texts and opportunities to hear strong models of reading. When children feel relaxed and confident, fluency improves naturally over time. It is not built through rushing, but through familiarity, practice, and understanding. The final layer is a child's response to the text. This is where reading moves beyond comprehension and into connection. When children are responding thoughtfully to a book, they begin to make links between what they are reading and their own experiences. They might compare a character's feeling to something they have experienced themselves, notice similarities between two stories, or comment on how a situation in the book reminds them of real life. These connections deepen understanding. When children relate a text to their own world, meaning becomes more secure and memorable. It is not about turning every story into a personal anecdote, but about allowing space for children to notice similarities, differences, and emotional links. Responses can also be expressive. Many young children show their understanding through performance, remembering favourite poems, repeating refrains from stories, or adopting the voice of a character. When a child confidently recites a repeated phrase or performs part of a story, it often shows that they have internalised its rhythm and meaning. These moments matter. They signal enjoyment, familiarity, and engagement. They show that the text has stayed with the child beyond the page. As with all aspects of reading for meaning, thoughtful response develops gradually. It grows through shared reading, discussion, and exposure to rich language. When children are given time to connect, reflect, and enjoy, their responses become deeper and much more confident. With all of this in mind, it is also helpful to consider what can slow progression in reading for meaning. Often, it isn't a lack of ability that holds children back, it can be the pace and pressure surrounding reading. Over-questioning, for example, can interrupt a child's natural processing. When every page is followed by rapid-fire questions, children may focus on producing answers rather than building understanding. Reading becomes something to perform, rather than something to experience. Prioritising speed can have a similar effect. When fluency is measured primarily by pace, children may rush through sentences without pausing to think. True fluency is about phrasing and meaning, not racing to the end. Focusing heavily on test-style answers can also narrow comprehension. When children learn that reading is about selecting the right response rather than exploring ideas, their thinking will become cautious and surface level. Constantly correcting every minor error may reduce confidence. While accuracy matters, children also need space to self-monitor and adjust independently. If adults intervene too quickly, children may stop listening to their own inner voice. Rushing through book bands before a child feels secure can also slow deeper understanding. Confidence and familiarity play a significant role in comprehension. When children have time to consolidate at a level, their expression, recall, and connection often strengthen naturally. None of these approaches come from poor intentions, they usually come from a desire to accelerate progress. But reading for meaning develops most effectively when children feel safe, unhurried, and supported to think. Strong foundations are built through steadiness, not speed. Finally, if we think about what builds strong foundations in reading, the answer is often simpler than we expect. Strong foundations grow through rereading familiar books together. Research has shown that reading the same text multiple times, often around 3 readings, can significantly strengthen comprehension. The first reading allows children to focus on decoding and becoming familiar with the structure of the text. The second supports fluency in phrasing. By the third reading, the cognitive effort required to recognise words has reduced, and attention can shift more fully towards meaning. When children revisit a text, they notice more. They begin to pick up vocabulary they might have missed before. They understand characters more deeply. They spot patterns and connections. Familiarity allows understanding to settle and strengthen. Strong foundations also grow through modelling thinking aloud. When adults pause and say, "I'm wondering why that happened," or "That didn't quite make sense, let me read that again," they demonstrate what thoughtful reading looks like. Children gradually internalise this process. They grow through little and often practice. 5 calm minutes a day is far more powerful than one long pressured reading session at the end of a busy evening. Consistency builds confidence. Short, positive experiences build stamina. They grow when reading is linked to real-life experiences. When children connect a story to something they have felt, seen, or done, understanding becomes more secure and meaningful. And importantly, strong foundations grow when self-correction is valued. When children are given space to notice and adjust their own mistakes, they develop independence and trust in their thinking. Reading for meaning does not require intensity. It requires steadiness. When children feel supported, unhurried, and safe to think, their understanding deepens naturally over time. If we want children to become thoughtful readers, we have to think about more than speed and accuracy. We have to think about foundations. Reading for meaning develops steadily through exposure, conversation, and time. It isn't built through pressure, it's built through confidence. If this was helpful, I'll be sharing more about the individual components of reading over the coming weeks. Thank you for watching.